Levin's house was old and large, but, though he lived there alone, he occupied and warmed the whole of it. He knew that this was ridiculous. He knew that it was bad and contrary to his new plans, but this house was a world in itself to him. It was a world where his father and mother had lived and died. They had lived a life which, for Levin, seemed the ideal of all perfection, and which he dreamed of renewing with his own wife, with his own family. Levin scarcely remembered his mother, but this remembrance was sacred, and his future wife, as he imagined her, was to be the counterpart of the ideally charming and adorable woman, his mother. For him, the love of a woman could not exist outside of marriage, but he imagined the family relationship first, and only afterwards the woman who would be the center of the family. His ideas about marriage were therefore essentially different from those held by the majority of his friends, for whom it was only one of innumerable social affairs. For Levin, it was the most important act of his life, whereon all his happiness depended, and now he must renounce it. When he entered the little parlor where he always took tea, and threw himself into his armchair with a book, while Agafya Mikhailovna brought him his cup, and sat near the window, saying as usual, "Well, I'll sit down, Batyushka," then he felt, strangely enough, that he had not renounced his daydreams, and that he could not live without them. Were it Kitty or another, still it would be. He read his book, had his mind on what he was reading, pausing occasionally to listen to Agafya Mikhailovna's unceasing prattle, but his imagination was all the time filled with those varied pictures of family happiness which hovered before him. He felt that in the depths of his soul some change, some modification, some crystallization was taking place. He listened while Agafya Mikhailovna told how Prokhor had forgotten God, and, instead of buying a horse with the money which Levin had given him, had taken it and gone on a spree, and beaten his wife almost to death. And while he listened he read his book, and again caught the thread of his thoughts, awakened by his reading. It was a book by Tyndall on heat. He remembered his criticisms on Tyndall's self-satisfaction in the cleverness of his management of his experiments and on his lack of philosophical views, and suddenly a happy thought crossed his mind. "In 2 years I shall have 2 Holland cows, perhaps Pava herself will still be alive, and possibly a dozen of Berkut's daughters will have been added to the herd, just from these 3. Splendid!" And again he picked up his book. "Well, very good. Electricity and heat are one and the same thing. But could one quantity take the place of the other in the equations used to settle this problem? No. What then? The bond between all forces of nature is felt, like instinct. When Pava's daughter grows into a cow with red and white spots, what a herd I shall have with those 3. Admirable! And my wife and I will go out with our guests to see the herd come in, and my wife will say, 'Kostya and I have brought this calf up just like a child.' 'How can this interest you so?' the guests will say. 'All that interests him interests me also.' But who will she be?" And he began to think of what happened in Moscow. "Well, what is to be done about it? I am not to blame, but now everything will be different. It is foolishness to let one's past life dominate the present. One must struggle to live better, much better." He raised his head and sank into thought. Old Alaska, who had not yet got over her delight at her master's return, had been barking up and down the courtyard. She came into the room, wagging her tail and bringing the freshness of the open air, and thrust her head under his hand and begged for a caress, whining plaintively. "She almost talks," said Agafya Mikhailovna. "She is only a dog, but she knows just as well that her master has come home and is sad." "Why sad?" "Da, don't I see it, Batyushka? It's time I knew how to read my masters. Grew up with my masters since they were children. No matter, Batyushka, your health is good and your conscience pure." Levin looked at her earnestly, in astonishment that she so divined his thoughts. And shall I give you some more tea?" said she, and taking the cup, she went out. Laska continued to nestle her head in her master's hand. He caressed her, and then she curled herself up around his feet, like a ring, laying her head on one of her hind paws, and, as proof that all was arranged to suit her, she opened her mouth a little, let her tongue slip out between her aged teeth, and, with a gentle puffing of her lips, gave herself up to beatific repose. Levin followed all of her movements. "So will I," said he to himself. "So will I. No matter. All will be well." Early on the morning after the ball, Anna Arkadyevna sent her husband a telegram announcing that she was going to leave Moscow that day. "No, I must go," she said to her sister-in-law, in explanation of her change of plan, and her tone signified that she had just remembered something that demanded her instant attention. "No, it would be much better if I could go this morning." Stepan Arkadyevitch did not dine at home, but he agreed to be back at 7 o'clock to escort his sister to the train. Kitty did not put in an appearance, but sent word that she had a headache. Dolly and Anna dined alone with the children and the English governess. Either the children were fickle or they were very sensitive and felt that Anna was not at all as she had been on the day when they had taken so kindly to her, that she no longer cared for them, for they suddenly ceased playing with their aunt, seemed to lose their affection for her, and cared very little that she was going away. Anna spent the whole morning in making the preparations for her departure. She wrote a few notes to her Moscow acquaintances, settled her accounts, and packed. To Dolly especially it seemed that she was not in a happy frame of mind, but in that state of mental agitation which Dolly knew from experience arose, not without excellent reason, from dissatisfaction with herself. After dinner Anna went to her room to dress, and Dolly followed her. "How strange you are to-day," said Dolly. "I? Do you think so? I am not strange, but I am cross. This is common with me. I should like to have a good cry. It is very silly, but it will pass away," said Anna, speaking quickly and hiding her blushing face in a little bag where she was packing her toilet articles and her handkerchiefs. Her eyes shone with tears which she could hardly keep back. "I was so loath to come away from Petersburg, and now I don't want to go back." "You came here, and you did a lovely thing," said Dolly, attentively observing her. Anna looked at her with eyes wet with tears. "Don't say that, Dolly. I have done nothing, and could do nothing. I often ask myself why people say things to spoil me. What have I done? What could I do? You found that your heart had enough love left to forgive. Without you, God knows what would have been. How fortunate you are, Anna," said Dolly. "All is serene and pure in your soul. Everyone has a skeleton in his closet, as the English say." "What skeleton have you, pray? In you everything is so serene." "I have mine," cried Anna suddenly, and an unexpected, crafty, mocking smile hovered over her lips in spite of her tears. "Well, in your case the skeleton must be a droll one and not grievous," replied Dolly with a smile. "No, it is grievous. Do you know why I go to-day and not to-morrow? This is a confession which weighs me down, but I wish to make it," said Anna decidedly, sitting down in an armchair and looking Dolly straight in the eyes. And to her astonishment she saw that Anna was blushing, even to her ears, even to the dark curls that played around the back of her neck. "Yes," Anna proceeded. "Do you know why Kitty did not come to dinner? She is jealous of me. I spoiled. It was through me that the ball last night was a torment and not a joy to her. But truly, truly, I was not to blame, or not much to blame," she said, with a special accent on the word "nemnozko," not much. "Oh, how exactly you said that like Stiva," remarked Dolly, laughing. Anna was vexed. "Oh, no, I am not like Stiva," said she, frowning. "I have told you this simply because I do not allow myself, for an instant, to doubt myself." But the very moment that she said these words she perceived how untrue they were. She not only doubted herself, but she felt such emotion at the thought of Vronsky that she took her departure sooner than she otherwise would, so that she might not meet him again. Yes, Stiva told me that you danced the mazurka with him, and that you cannot imagine how ridiculously it turned out. I thought only to help along the match, and suddenly it went exactly opposite. Perhaps against my will, She blushed and did not finish her sentence. "Oh, these things are felt instantly," said Dolly. "I should be in despair if I felt that there was anything serious on his part," interrupted Anna. "But I am convinced that all this will be quickly forgotten, and that Kitty will not long be angry with me." "In the first place, Anna, to tell the truth, I should not be very sorry if this marriage fell through. It would be vastly better for it to stop right here if Vronsky can fall in love with you in a single day." "Oh, heavens! That would be so idiotic," said Anna, and again an intense blush of satisfaction overspread her face at hearing the thought that occupied her expressed in words. "And that is why I go away, after making an enemy of Kitty, whom I love so dearly. Oh, how sweet she is! But you will arrange that, Dolly, won't you?" Dolly could hardly refrain from smiling. She loved Anna, but it was pleasant to her to discover that she also had her weaknesses. "An enemy? That cannot be." "And I should have been so glad to have you all love me as I love you. But now I love you all the more than ever," said Anna, with tears in her eyes. "Oh, how absurd I am to-day!" She passed her handkerchief over her eyes and began to get ready. At the very moment of her departure came Stepan Arkadyevitch with rosy, happy face and an odor of wine and cigars. Anna's tender-heartedness had communicated itself to Dolly, and, when she kissed her for the last time, she whispered, "Think, Anna, what you have done for me. I shall never forget. And remember that I love you, and always shall love you as my best friend." "I don't understand why," replied Anna, kissing her and struggling with her tears. "You have understood me, and you do understand me. Farewell, my dearest." "Well, all is over, and thank the Lord," was Anna's first thought after she had said good-bye to her brother, who had blocked up the entrance to the railway carriage even after the third bell had rung. She sat down on the divanchik next Annushka, her maid, and began to examine the feebly lighted compartment. "Thank the Lord! Tomorrow I shall see Seroza and Alexey Alexandrovitch, and my good and commonplace life will begin again as of old." With the same mental preoccupation that had possessed her all that day, Anna found a satisfaction in attending minutely to the arrangements for the journey. With her skillful little hands she opened her red bag and took out a cushion, placed it on her knees, wrapped her feet warmly, and composed herself comfortably. A lady, who seemed to be an invalid, had already gone to sleep. Two other ladies entered into conversation with Anna, and a fat elderly dame, well wrapped up, expressed her opinion on the temperature. Anna exchanged a few words with the ladies, but, not taking any interest in their conversation, asked Annushka for her traveling lamp, placed it on the back of her seat, and took from her bag a paper cutter and an English novel. At first she could not read. The going and coming and the general bustle disturbed her. When once the train had started, she could not help listening to the noises, the snow striking against the window and sticking to the glass, the conductor, as he passed, with the snowflakes melting on his coat, the remarks about the terrible storm, all distracted her attention. Afterwards it became more monotonous, always the same jolting and jarring, the same snow on the window, the same sudden changes from warmth to cold, and back to warmth again, the same faces in the dim light, and the same voices. And Anna began to read, and to follow what she was reading. Annushka was already asleep, holding the little red bag on her knees with great, clumsy hands, clad in gloves, one of which was torn. Anna read, and understood what she read, but it was not pleasant to her to read, in other words, to enter into the lives of other people. She had too keen a desire to live herself. If she read how the heroine of her story took care of the sick, she would have liked to go with noiseless steps into the sick room. If she read how a member of Parliament made a speech, she would have liked to make that speech. If she read how Lady Mary rode after the hounds, and made sport of her sister-in-law, and astonished every one by her audacity, she would have liked to do the same. But she could do nothing, and with her little hands she clutched the paper-cutter, and forced herself to read calmly. The hero of her novel had reached the summit of his English ambition, a baronetcy and an estate, and Anna felt a desire to go with him to this estate, when suddenly it seemed to her that he ought to feel a sense of shame, and that she ought to share it. But why should he feel ashamed? Why should I feel ashamed? She asked herself with astonishment and discontent. She closed the book, and, leaning back against the chair, held the paper-cutter tightly in both hands. There was nothing to be ashamed of. She reviewed all her memories of her visit to Moscow. They were all pleasant and good. She remembered the ball. She remembered Vronsky and his humble and passionate face. She recalled all her relations with him. There was nothing to be ashamed of. But at the same time, in these reminiscences, the sense of shame kept growing stronger and stronger, and it seemed to her that inward voice, whenever she thought of Vronsky, seemed to say, warmly, very warmly, passionately, "Well, what is this?" she asked herself resolutely, as she changed her position in the seat. "What does this mean? Am I afraid to face these memories? Well, what is it? Can there be, any relationship between that boy officer and me beyond what exists between all acquaintances?" She smiled disdainfully, and again took up her book. But now she really could not any longer comprehend what she was reading. She rubbed her paper-cutter over the pane, and then pressed its cool, smooth surface to her cheek, and then she almost laughed out loud with the joy that unreasonably took possession of her. She felt her nerves grow more and more tense, like the strings on some musical instrument screwed up to the last degree. She felt her eyes open wider and wider. Her fingers and her toes twitched nervously. Something seemed to choke her, and all objects and sounds in the wavering semi-darkness surprised her by their exaggerated proportions. She kept having moments of doubt as to whether they were going backwards or forwards, or if the train had come to a stop. Was it Annushka there, sitting next to her, or was it a stranger? What is that on the hook? My fur shuba, or an animal? And what am I doing here? Am I myself, or someone else? It was terrible to her to yield to these hallucinations, but something kept attracting her to them, and she could by her own will either yield to them or withdraw from them. In order to regain possession of herself, Anna arose, took off her plaid, and laid aside her pelerine of thick cloth. For a moment she thought that she had conquered herself, for when a tall, thick muzhik, dressed in a long nankeen overcoat, which lacked a button, came in, she recognized in him the stove-tender. She saw him look at the thermometer, and noticed how the wind and the snow came blowing in as he opened the door, and then everything became confused again. The tall peasant began to draw fantastic figures on the wall. The old lady seemed to stretch out her legs and fill the whole carriage as with a black cloud. Then she thought she heard terrible thumping and rapping, a noise like something tearing. Then a red and blinding fire flashed in her eyes, and then all vanished in darkness. Anna felt as if she was falling, but this was not at all alarming, but rather pleasant. The voice of a man all wrapped up and covered with snow shouted something in her ear. She sat up, recovered her wits, and perceived that they were approaching a station, and the man was the conductor. She bade Annushka give her the pelerine which she had laid aside, and her handkerchief, and, having put them on, she went to the door. "Do you wish to go out?" asked Annushka. "Yes, I want to get a breath of fresh air. It is very hot here." And she opened the door. The snowstorm and the wind rushed in to meet her, and disputed the door with her. And this seemed to her very jolly. The storm seemed to be waiting for her. It gaily whistled and was eager to carry her away. But she clung to the cold railing with one hand, and, holding her dress, she stepped out on the platform and left the car. The wind was fierce on the steps, but on the platform, under the shelter of the station, it was calmer, and she found a genuine pleasure in filling her lungs with the frosty air. Standing near the car she watched the platform and the station gleaming with lights. A furious snowstorm was raging and whistling among the wheels of the carriages, around the columns, and into the corners of the station. The carriages, the pillars, the people, everything visible, were covered on one side with snow, and it was increasing momently. Once in a while there would be a lull, but then again it blew with such gusts that it seemed impossible to make way against it. Meantime a few people were running hither and thither, talking gaily, opening and shutting the great doors of the station, and making the platform planks creak under their feet. The flitting shadow of a man passed rapidly by her feet, and she heard the blows of a hammer falling on the iron. "Send off the telegram!" cried an angry voice on the other side of the track, in the midst of the drifting storm. "This way, please, number 28," cried other voices, and several people covered with snow hurried by. Two gentlemen, with lighted cigarettes in their mouths, passed near Anna. She was just about to re-enter the carriage, after getting one more breath of fresh air, and had already taken her hand from her muff to lay hold of the railing, when the flickering light from the reflector was cut off by a man in a military coat, who came close to her. She looked up, and that instant recognized Vronsky's face. Raising his hand to his visor, he bowed low, and asked if she needed anything, if he might not be of service to her. She looked at him for a considerable time without replying, and although he was in the shadow, she saw, or thought she saw, the expression of his face, and even of his eyes. It was a repetition of that respectful admiration which had so impressed her on the evening of the ball. More than once that day she had said to herself that Vronsky, for her, was only one of the 100 young men whom one meets in society, that she would never permit herself to give him a second thought. But now, on the first instant of seeing him again, a sensation of pride and joy seized her. She had no need to ask why he was there. She knew, as truly as if he had told her, that he was there so as to be where she was. "I did not know that you were going to Petersburg. Why are you going?" said she, letting her hand fall from the railing. A joy which she could not restrain shone in her face. "Why am I going?" he repeated, looking straight into her eyes. "You know that I came simply for this, to be where you are," he said. "I could not do otherwise." And at this instant the wind, as if it had conquered every obstacle, blew the snow from the roofs of the carriages, and whirled away a piece of sheet iron which it had torn off, and at the same time the deep whistle of the locomotive gave a melancholy, mournful cry. Never had the horror of a tempest appeared to her more beautiful than now. He had said what her heart longed to hear, but what her better judgment condemned. She made no reply, but he perceived by her face how she fought against herself. "Forgive me if what I said displeases you," he murmured humbly. He spoke respectfully, courteously, but in such a resolute, decided tone, that for some time she was unable to reply. "What you said was wrong, and I beg of you, if you are a gentleman, to forget it, as I shall forget it," she said at last. "I shall never forget, and I shall never be able to forget any of your words, any of your gestures. Enough, enough!" she cried, vainly endeavoring to give an expression of severity to her face, at which Vronsky was passionately gazing. And grasping the cold railing, she mounted the steps and quickly entered the vestibule of the carriage. But she stopped in the little vestibule, and tried to recall to her imagination what had taken place. But though she found it impossible to remember either her own words or his, she instinctively felt that this brief conversation had brought them frightfully close together, and that she was at once alarmed and delighted. After she had stood there a few seconds, she went back into the carriage and sat down in her place. The nervous strain which had been tormenting her not only returned, but became more intense, until she began to fear every moment that something would snap her brain. She did not sleep all night, But in this nervous tension, and in the fantasies which filled her imagination, there was nothing disagreeable or painful. On the contrary, it was joyous, burning excitement. Toward morning Anna dozed as she sat in her armchair, and when she awoke it was broad daylight, and the train was approaching Petersburg. Instantly the thought of her home, her husband, her son, and all the labors of the day and the coming days filled her mind. The train had hardly reached the station at Petersburg when Anna stepped out on the platform, and the first person that she saw was her husband waiting for her. "Oh, good heavens! Why do his ears stand out so?" she thought, as she looked at his reserved and portly figure, and especially at his stiff cartilaginous ears, which, as they propped out the rim of his round hat, struck her for the first time. When he saw her, he came to meet her at the carriage, compressing his lips into his habitual smile of irony, looking straight at her with his great weary eyes. A disagreeable thought made her heart sink when she saw his stubborn, weary look. She felt that she had expected to find him different. Especially was she astonished by the feeling of self-dissatisfaction which she experienced on meeting him. This feeling was associated with her home, akin to the state of hypocrisy which she recognized in her relations with her husband. This feeling was not novel. She had felt it before without heeding it, but now she realized it clearly and painfully. "There, you see, I am a tender husband, tender as the first year of our marriage. I was burning with desire to see you," said he, in his slow, deliberate voice, and with the light tone of raillery that he generally used in speaking to her, a tone of ridicule of any one who should really say such things. "Is Serosa well?" she asked. "And is this all the reward," he said, "for my ardor?" "He is well, very well." Vronsky also had not even attempted to sleep all that night. He sat in his armchair, now gazing straight forward, now looking at those who came in and went out, and if before he had impressed strangers and irritated them by his imperturbable dignity, now he would have seemed to them far more haughty and self-contained. He looked at men as if they were things. A nervous young man, employed in the district court, was sitting opposite him in the carriage, and came to hate him on account of this aspect. The young man asked for a light, and spoke to him, and even touched him, in order to make him perceive that he was not a thing but a man. Yet Vronsky looked at him exactly as he looked at the carriage lamp. And the young man made a grimace, feeling that he should lose command of himself to be so scorned by a man. Vronsky saw nothing, saw no one. He felt as if he were a Tsar, not because he believed that he had made an impression upon Anna, he did not fully realize that, as yet, but because the impression which she had made on him filled him with happiness and pride. What would be the outcome of all this he did not know, and did not even consider, but he felt that all his hitherto dissipated and scattered powers were now concentrating and converging with frightful rapidity toward one beatific focus. And he was happy in this thought. He knew only that he had told her the truth when he said he was going where she was, that all the happiness of life, the sole significance of life, he found now in seeing and hearing her. And when he left his compartment at Bologovo to get a glass of seltzer, and he saw Anna, involuntarily his first word told her what he thought. And he was glad that he had spoken as he did, glad that she knew all now, and was thinking about it. He did not sleep all night. Returning to his carriage, he did not cease recalling all his memories of her, the words that she had spoken, and in his imagination glowed the pictures of a possible future which overwhelmed his heart. When, on reaching Petersburg, he left the carriage, after his sleepless night, he felt as fresh and vigorous as if he had just had a cold bath. He stood near his carriage, waiting to see her pass. "Once more I shall see her," he said to himself, with a smile. "I shall see her graceful bearing, her face. She will speak a word to me, will turn her head, will look at me. Perhaps she will smile on me." But it was her husband whom first he saw, politely escorted through the crowd by the station master. Oh, yes, the husband. And then Vronsky for the first time clearly realized that the husband was an important factor in Anna's life. He knew that she had a husband, but he had not realized his existence, and he now fully realized it only as he saw his head and shoulders, and his legs clothed in black trousers, and especially when he saw this husband unconcernedly take her hand with an air of proprietorship. When he saw Alexey Alexandrovitch, with his Petersburgish fresh face, and his solid, self-confident figure, his round hat, his slightly stooping shoulders, he began to believe in his existence, and he experienced an unpleasant sensation, such as a man tormented by thirst might experience, who should discover a fountain, but find that a dog, a sheep, or a pig has been drinking and fouling the water. Alexey Alexandrovitch's stiff and heavy gait was exceedingly distasteful to Vronsky. He would not acknowledge that anyone besides himself had the right to love Anna. But she was still the same, and the sight of her had still the same effect on him, physically kindling him, stirring him, and filling his heart with joy. He ordered his German body servant, who came hurrying up to him from the second-class carriage, to see to the baggage and to go home, and he himself went to her. Thus he witnessed the first meeting between husband and wife, and with a lover's intuition perceived the shade of constraint with which Anna spoke to her husband. No, she does not love him, and she cannot love him, was his mental judgment. Even as he came up to Anna Arkadyevna from behind, he noticed with joy that she felt him near her and looked round, and having recognized him, she went on talking with her husband. "Did you pass a good night?" he inquired, bowing to her and her husband, and allowing Alexey Alexandrovitch the opportunity to accept the honor of the salutation, and recognize him, or not recognize him, as it might seem good to him. "Thank you, very good," she replied. Her face expressed weariness, lacked that spark of animation which was generally hovering now in her eyes, now in her smile. But, for a single instant, at the sight of Vronsky, something flashed into her eyes, and, notwithstanding the fact that the fire instantly died away, he was overjoyed even at this. She raised her eyes to her husband to see whether he knew Vronsky. Alexey Alexandrovitch looked at him with displeasure, vaguely remembering who he was. Vronsky's calm self-assurance struck upon Alexey Alexandrovitch's cool superciliousness as a scythe strikes a rock. "Count Vronsky," said Anna. "Ah, we have met before, it seems to me," said Alexey Alexandrovitch with indifference, extending his hand. "Went with the mother and came home with the son," said he, speaking with precision, as if his words were worth a ruble apiece. "I presume you are returning from a furlough?" And without waiting for an answer, he turned to his wife, in his ironical tone. "Did they shed many tears at Moscow on your leaving them?" By thus addressing his wife he intended to give Vronsky to understand that he desired to be left alone, and again bowing to him, he touched his hat. But Vronsky had one more word to say to Anna. "I hope I have the honor of calling on you," said he. Alexey Alexandrovitch, with weary eyes, looked at Vronsky. "Very happy," he said coldly. "We receive on Mondays." Then, leaving Vronsky entirely, he said to his wife, still in a jesting tone, "And how fortunate that I happen to have a spare half-hour to come to meet you and show you my affection." "You emphasize your affection too much for me to appreciate it," she replied, in the same spirit of raillery, involuntarily listening to Vronsky's steps behind them. "But what is that to me?" she asked herself in thought. Then she began to ask her husband how Seroza had got along during her absence. "Oh, excellently. Mariette says that he has been very good, and I am sorry to mortify you. He did not seem to miss you, not so much as your husband did. But again, merci, my dear, that you came a day earlier. Our dear Samovar will be delighted." He called the celebrated Countess Lydia Ivanovna by the nickname Samovar, because, like a tea-urn, she was always and everywhere bubbling and boiling. "She has kept asking after you, and do you know, if I make bold to advise you, You would do well to go see her to-day. You see, her heart is always sore about something. At present, besides her usual cares, she is greatly concerned about the reconciliation of Yablonskys." The Countess Lidia Ivanovna was a friend of Anna's husband, and the centre of a certain clique in Petersburg society, to which Anna on her husband's account, rather than for any other reason, belonged. "Yes, but didn't I write her?" "She must have all the details. Go to her, my love, if you are not too tired. Well, Kondraty will call your carriage, and I am going to a committee meeting. I shall not have to dine alone to-day," continued Alexey Alexandrovitch, not in jest this time. "You cannot imagine how used I am to—" And with a peculiar smile, giving her a long pressure of the hand, he conducted her to the carriage. The first person to meet Anna when she reached home was her son. He darted downstairs, in spite of his governess's reproof, and with a wild delight called, "Mamma, mamma!" Rushing up to her, he threw his arms around her neck. "I told you it was mamma!" he shouted to the governess. "I knew it was!" But the son, no less than the husband, awakened in Anna a feeling of disillusion. She imagined him better than he was in reality. She was obliged to descend to the reality in order to look on him as he was. But in fact he was lovely, with his fair curls, his blue eyes, and his pretty plump legs in their neatly fitting stockings. She felt an almost physical satisfaction in feeling him near her, and in his caresses, and a moral calm in looking into his tender, confiding, loving eyes, and in hearing his innocent questions. She unpacked the gifts sent him by Dolly's children, and told him how there was a little girl in Moscow named Tanya, and how this Tanya knew how to read, and was teaching the other children to read. "Am I not as good as she?" asked Seroza. "For me, you are worth all the rest of the world." "I know it," said Seroza, smiling. Anna had not finished drinking her coffee when the Countess Lidia Ivanovna was announced. The Countess Lidia Ivanovna was a tall, stout woman with an unhealthy, sallow complexion, and handsome, dreamy black eyes. Anna liked her, but today, as if for the first time, she saw her with all her faults. "Well, my dear, did you carry the olive branch?" demanded the Countess Lidia Ivanovna as she entered the room. "Yes, it is all made up," replied Anna. "But it was not so bad as we thought. As a general thing, my sister-in-law is too peremptory." But the Countess Lidia, who was interested in everything that did not specially concern herself, had the habit of sometimes not heeding what did not interest her. She interrupted Anna. "Well, this world is full of woes and tribulations, and I am all worn out to-day." "What is it?" asked Anna, striving to repress a smile. "I am beginning to weary of the ineffectual attempts to get at the truth, and sometimes I am utterly discouraged. The work of the Little Sisters," this was a philanthropic and religiously patriotic institution, "used to get along splendidly, but there is nothing to be done with these men," added the Countess Lidia Ivanovna, with an air of ironical resignation to fate. "They got hold of the idea, they mutilated it, and then they judge it so meanly, so wretchedly. 2 or 3 men, your husband among them, understand all the significance of this work, but the others only discredit it. Yesterday I had a letter from Pravdin." Pravdin was a famous Panslavist who lived abroad, and the Countess Lidia Ivanovna related what he had said in his letter. Then she went on to describe the troubles and snares that blocked the work of uniting the churches, and finally departed in haste, because it was the day for her to be present at the meeting of some society or other, and at the sitting of the Slavonic Committee. "All this is just as it has been, but why did I never notice it before?" said Anna to herself. "Was she very irritable today? But at any rate, it is ridiculous. Her aims are charitable. She is a Christian, and yet she is angry with everyone, and everyone is her enemy. And yet all her enemies are working for Christianity and charity." After the departure of the Countess Lidia Ivanovna came a friend, the wife of a director, who told her all the news of the city. At 3 o'clock she went out, promising to be back in time for dinner. Alexey Alexandrovitch was at the meeting of the ministry. The hour before dinner, which Anna spent alone, she employed sitting with her son, who had his dinner by himself, in arranging her things, and in reading and answering the letters and notes heaped up on her writing table. The sense of causeless shame, and the agitation from which she had suffered so strangely during her journey, now completely disappeared. Under the conditions of her ordinary everyday life, she felt calm and free from reproach, and she was filled with wonder as she recalled her condition of the night before. What was it? Nothing. Vronsky said a foolish thing. It is easy to put an end to such nonsense, and I answered him exactly right. To speak of it to my husband is unnecessary and impossible. To speak about it would seem to attach importance to what has none. And she recalled how, when a young subordinate of her husband's in Petersburg had almost made her a declaration, and she had told him about it, Alexey Alexandrovitch answered that as she went into society, she, like all society women, might expect such experiences, but that he had perfect confidence in her tact, and never would permit himself to humiliate her or him by jealousy. Why tell then? Besides, thank God, there is nothing to tell. Alexey Alexandrovitch returned from the ministry about 4:00, but as often happened, he found no time to speak to Anna. He went directly to his private room to give audience to some petitioners who were waiting for him, and to sign some papers brought him by his chief secretary. The Karenins always had at least 3 visitors to dine with them, and that day there came an old lady, a cousin of Alexey Alexandrovitch's, a department director with his wife, and a young man recommended to Alexey Alexandrovitch for employment. Anna came to the drawing-room to receive them at 5:00 precisely. The great bronze clock, of the time of Peter the Great, had not yet finished its 5th stroke when Alexey Alexandrovitch, in white cravat and with 2 decorations on his dress coat, left his dressing-room. He had an engagement immediately after dinner. Every moment of Alexey Alexandrovitch's life was counted and occupied, and in order to accomplish what he had to do every day, he was forced to use the strictest punctuality. Without haste and without rest was his motto. He entered the dining-room, bowed to his guests, and, giving his wife a smile, hastily sat down. "Yes, my solitude is over. You can't believe how irksome," he laid a special stress on the word nelovko, irksome, "it is to dine alone." During the dinner he talked with his wife about matters in Moscow, and, with his mocking smile, inquired especially about Stepan Arkadyevitch. But the conversation dwelt for the most part on common subjects, about official and social matters in Petersburg. After dinner he spent a half-hour with his guests, and then, giving his wife another smile, and pressing her hand, he left the room and went to the council. Anna did not go out that evening, either to the Princess Betsy Tverskaya's, who, having heard of her arrival, had sent her an invitation, or to the theatre, where she just now had a box. She did not go out principally because the gown on which she had counted was not finished. After the departure of her guests, Anna took a general survey of her wardrobe, and was very angry. She was extremely clever in dressing at small expense, and just before she went to Moscow she had given 3 gowns to her dressmaker to make over. These gowns required to be made over in such a way that no one would recognize them, and they should have been ready 3 days before. 2 of the gowns proved to be absolutely unfinished, and one was not made over in a way which Anna liked. The dressmaker sought to explain what she had done, declaring that her way was best, and Anna reprimanded her so severely that afterwards she felt ashamed of herself. To calm her agitation, she went to the nursery and spent the whole evening with her son, put him to bed herself, made the sign of the cross over him, and tucked the quilt about him. She was glad that she had not gone out, and that she had spent such a happy evening. It was so quiet and restful, and now she saw clearly that all that had seemed so important during her railway journey was only one of the ordinary insignificant events of social life, that she had nothing of which to be ashamed, either in her own eyes or in the eyes of others. She sat down in front of the fireplace with her English novel, and waited for her husband. About 10:30 exactly his ring was heard at the door, and he came into the room. "Here you are, at last," she said, giving him her hand. He kissed her hand and sat down near her. Your journey, I see, was on the whole very successful," said he. "Yes, very," she replied, and she began to relate all the details from the beginning, her journey with the Countess Vronskaya, her arrival, the accident at the station, the pity which she had felt, first for her brother, and afterwards for Dolly. "I do not see how it is possible to pardon such a man, even though he is your brother," said Alexey Alexandrovitch severely. Anna smiled. She appreciated that he said this to show that not even kinship could bend him from the strictness of his honest judgment. She knew this trait in her husband's character, and liked it. "I am glad that it ended so satisfactorily, and that you have come home again," he continued. "Well, what do they say there about the new measures that I introduced in the council?" Anna had heard nothing about this new measure, and she was confused because she had so easily forgotten something which to him was so important. "Here, on the contrary, it has made a great sensation," said he, with a self-satisfied smile. She saw that Alexey Alexandrovitch wanted to tell her something very flattering to himself about this affair, and, by means of questions, she led him up to the story. And he, with the same self-satisfied smile, began to tell her of the congratulations which he had received on account of this measure, which had been passed. "I was very, very glad. This proves that at last reasonable and serious views about this question are beginning to be formed among us." After he had taken his second glass of tea, with cream and bread, Alexey Alexandrovitch arose to go to his library. "But you did not go out? It was very tiresome for you?" he said. "Oh, no," she replied, rising with her husband, and going with him through the hall to the library. "What are you reading now?" she asked. "Just now I am reading the Duc de Lille, Poésie des Enfers," he replied. "A very remarkable book." Anna smiled, as one smiles at the weakness of those we love, and, passing her arm through her husband's, accompanied him to the library door. She knew that his habit of reading in the evening had become inexorable, and that, notwithstanding his absorbing duties, which took so much of his time at the council, he felt it his duty to follow all that seemed remarkable in the sphere of literature. She also knew that while he felt a special interest in works on political economy, philosophy, and religion, art was quite foreign to his nature. And notwithstanding this, or better, for that very reason, Alexey Alexandrovitch allowed nothing that was attracting attention in that field to escape his notice, but considered it his duty to read everything. She knew that in the province of political economy, philosophy, religion, Alexey Alexandrovitch had his doubts, and tried to solve them. But in questions of art or poetry, particularly in music, the comprehension of which was utterly beyond him, he had the most precise and definite opinions. He loved to talk of Shakespeare, Raphael, and Beethoven, of the importance of the new school of music and poetry, all of whom were classed by him according to the most rigorous logic. "Well, God be with you," she said, as they reached the door of the library. Near her husband's armchair were standing, as usual, the shade lamp already lighted, and a carafe with water. "And I'm going to write to Moscow." Again he pressed her hand and kissed it. "Taken all in all, he is a good man, upright, excellent, remarkable in his sphere," said Anna to herself, on her way to her room, as if she was defending him from some one who accused him of not being lovable. "But why do his ears stick out so? Or does he cut his hair too short?" It was just midnight, and Anna was still sitting at her writing table finishing a letter to Dolly, when measured steps in slippers were heard, and Alexey Alexandrovitch, who had washed his face and brushed his hair, came in with his book under his arm. "Late, late," he said with his usual smile, and passed on to his sleeping room. And what right had he to look at him so, thought Anna, recalling Vronsky's expression when he saw Alexey Alexandrovitch. Having undressed, she went to her room, but in her face there was none of the animation that shone in her eyes and in her smile at Moscow. On the contrary, the fire had either died away or was somewhere far away and out of sight. On leaving Petersburg, Vronsky had installed his beloved friend and comrade, Petritsky, in his ample quarters on the Morskaya. Petritsky was a young lieutenant, not particularly distinguished, and not only not rich, but over ears in debt. Every evening he came home tipsy, and he spent much of his time at the police courts, in search of strange, or amusing, or scandalous stories. But in spite of all he was a favorite with his comrades and his chiefs. About 11 o'clock in the morning, when Vronsky reached his rooms after his journey, he saw at the entrance an Ivashchik's carriage, which he knew very well. From the door, when he rang, he heard men's laughter and the lisping of a woman's voice, and Petritsky shouting, "If it's any of those villains, don't let 'em in." Vronsky, not allowing his denshchik to announce his presence, quietly entered the anteroom. The Baroness Shilton, a friend of Petritsky's, shining in a lilac satin robe and with her little pink face, was making coffee before a round table, and, like a canary bird, was filling the room with her Parisian slang. Petritsky in his overcoat, and Captain Kamerovsky in full uniform, apparently just from duty, were sitting near her. "Bravo, Vronsky!" cried Petritsky, leaping up and overturning the chair. "The master himself! Baroness, coffee for him from the new coffee-pot. We did not expect you. I hope that you are pleased with the new ornament in your library," he said, pointing to the Baroness. "You are acquainted, aren't you?" "I should think so," said Vronsky, smiling gaily, and squeezing the Baroness's dainty little hand. "We're old friends." "Are you back from a journey?" asked the Baroness. "Then I'm off. Ach, I'm going this minute if I'm in the way." "You are home wherever you are, Baroness," said Vronsky. "How are you, Kamerovsky?" coolly shaking hands with the captain. "There now, you would never think of saying such lovely things as that," said the Baroness to Petritsky. "No, why not? After dinner I could say better things." "Yes, after dinner there's no more merit in them. Well, I will make your coffee while you go and wash your hands and brush off the dust," said the Baroness, again sitting down and industriously turning the screw of the new coffee-pot. "Pierre, bring some more coffee," she said to Petritsky, whom she called Pierre after his family name, making no concealment of her intimacy with him. "I will add it." "You will spoil it." "No, I won't spoil it." "Well, and your wife?" said the Baroness, suddenly interrupting Vronsky's remarks to his companions. "We have been marrying you off. Did you bring your wife?" "No, Baroness. I was born a Bohemian, and I shall die a Bohemian." "So much the better. So much the better. Give us your hand." And the Baroness, without letting him go, began to talk with him, developing her various plans of life, and asking his advice with many jests. "He will never be willing to let me have a divorce. Well, what am I to do?" He was her husband. "I now mean to institute a lawsuit. What should you think of it? Kamerovsky, just watch the coffee. It's boiling over. You see how well I understand business. I mean to bring a lawsuit to get control of my fortune. Do you understand this nonsense? Under the pretext that I have been unfaithful," said she in a scornful tone, "he means to get possession of my estate." Vronsky listened with amusement to this gay prattle of the pretty woman, approved of what she said, gave her half-jesting advice, and assumed the tone he usually affected with women of her character. In his Petersburg world, humanity was divided into two absolutely distinct categories. The one of a low order, trivial, stupid, and above all ridiculous people, who declare that one husband ought to live with one wedded wife, that girls should be virtuous, women chaste, men brave, temperate, and upright, occupied in bringing up their children decently, in earning their bread, and paying their debts, and other such absurdities. People of this kind were old-fashioned and ridiculous. But there was another and vastly superior class, to which he and his friends belonged, and in this the chief requirement was that its members should be elegant, generous, bold, gay, unblushingly given over to every passion, and scornful of all the rest. Only for the first moment was Vronsky bewildered under the impressions which he had brought back from Moscow, of an entirely different world. But soon, and as naturally as one puts off old slippers, he got into the spirit of his former gay and jovial life. The coffee was never served. It boiled over, spattered them all, and wet a costly tablecloth and the Baroness's dress. But it served the end that was desired, for it gave rise to many jests and merry peals of laughter. "Well, now, Good-bye, for you will never get dressed, and I shall have on my conscience the worst crime that a decent man can commit, that of not taking a bath. So you advise me to put the knife to his throat?" "By all means, and in such a way that your little hand will come near his lips. He will kiss your little hand, and all will end to everybody's satisfaction," said Vronsky. "This evening, at the Theatre Français," said she, and took her departure with her rustling train. Kamerovsky likewise arose, but Vronsky, without waiting for him to go, shook hands with him, and went to his dressing-room. While he was taking his bath, Petritsky sketched for him in a few lines his situation, and how it had changed during Vronsky's absence. No money at all, his father declaring that he would not give him any more, or pay a single debt. One tailor determined to have him arrested, and a second no less determined. His colonel insisted that, if these scoundrels continued, he should leave the regiment. The baroness was as annoying to him as a bitter radish, principally because she was always wanting to squander money. "But she is a daisy, a charmer," he assured Vronsky, in the strict Oriental style. "Your servant Rebecca, kind, you know." He had been having a quarrel with Berkoshef, and he wanted to send him his seconds, but he imagined nothing would come of it. As for the rest, everything was getting along particularly jolly. And then, without leaving Vronsky time to realize the minutiae of his situation, Petritsky began to retail the news of the day. As he listened to Petritsky's well-known gossip in the familiar environment of his quarters where he had lived for 3 years, Vronsky experienced the pleasant sensation of his return to his gay and idle Petersburg life. "It cannot be," he cried, referring to the report that Laura had taken up with Malif and thrown Furtinghoff over. "And is he as stupid and as conceited as ever? Well, and how about Bazulukov?" "Ah, Bazulukov! Here's a good story, fascinating," said Petritsky. "You know his passion, balls, and he never misses one at court. At the last one he went in a new helmet. Have you seen the new helmets? Very handsome, light. Well, he was standing. No, but listen." "Yes, I am listening," replied Vronsky, rubbing his face with a towel. "The Grand Duchess was just going by on the arm of some foreign ambassador or other, and unfortunately for him their conversation turned on the new helmets. The Grand Duchess wanted to point out one of the new helmets, and, seeing our Golubchik standing there," here Petritsky showed him how he stood in his helmet, "she begged him to show her his helmet. He did not budge. What does it mean? The fellows wink at him, make signs, scowl at him. Give it to her. He does not stir. He is like a dead man. You can imagine the scene. Now, then they attempted to take it off. He won't let it go. At last he himself takes it off, and hands it to the Grand Duchess. 'Here, this is the new kind,' said the Grand Duchess, but as she turned it over, you can imagine it, out came, pears, bonbons, 2 pounds of bonbons. He had been to market, Golubchik." Vronsky burst out laughing, and long afterwards, even when speaking of other things, the memory of the unfortunate helmet caused him to break out into a good-natured laugh, which showed his handsome, regular teeth. Having learned all the news, Vronsky donned his uniform with the aid of his valet, and went out to report himself. After he had reported, he determined to go to his brother's, to Betsy's, and to make a few calls, so as to secure an entry into the society where he should be likely to see Madame Karenina. And in accordance with the usual custom at Petersburg, he left his rooms, expecting to return only when it was very late at night. End of Chapter 34. An end of Part 1 of Anna Karenina by Leo Tolstoy. Translated by Nathan Haskell Doyle.